Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center of Earth's largest space station, watching the holographic display with growing horror. Red dots marked dead worlds across the galaxy map. Each dot had once been home to millions of humans. The communication officer's voice shook as he spoke. "Admiral, we're receiving the final transmission from New Haven Colony." Sarah closed her eyes. New Haven was home to 12 million people. Had been home to 12 million people. "Put it through," she said quietly. Static filled the room. Then, a woman's voice came through, broken and desperate. "This is Governor Martinez of New Haven. The alien ships are in orbit. They're not responding to any communication attempts. They're not asking for surrender. They're charging their weapons. Oh God, the sky is turning red. Tell Earth we tried to—" The transmission cut to silence. Sarah opened her eyes and looked at the map again. Another red dot appeared where New Haven used to be. That made 47 human colonies destroyed in the past 3 months. Over 8 billion people dead. "Admiral," her aide whispered, "we have reports coming in from the outer rim. The aliens are moving toward the core systems. The aliens called themselves the Zephyrian Consortium. They were old, older than human civilization. Their ships moved like liquid metal through space, and their weapons could turn entire planets into burning gas. They had been watching humanity, spread across the galaxy for centuries, and now they had decided to act. Sarah had tried everything. Earth's military was strong, human ships were fast and well-armed, human soldiers were brave and clever, but none of it mattered against technology that was thousands of years more advanced. The first contact with the Zephyrians had come 6 months ago. A single massive ship had appeared in the Proxima Centauri system. It had broadcast a message, in perfect English. "The galaxy belongs to the ancient ones. Younger races must make way. You have 1 year to leave our space." Humanity's response had been typical. The UN Security Council had debated for weeks. Some wanted to negotiate. Others wanted to fight. A few suggested running, abandoning the colonies and fleeing to the far edges of the galaxy. But humans were stubborn. They had built homes on these worlds. They had children who had never seen Earth. These colonies were not just places to live. They were humanity's future among the stars. So Earth had sent a message back. "These worlds are our homes now. We will not abandon them." The Zephyrians had not replied with words. They had replied with fire. The attack started at the furthest colonies, small settlements with a few 100,000 people. The Zephyrian ships would arrive without warning, target the planet from orbit, and fire weapons that Sarah's scientists still could not understand. The weapons did not just destroy cities or continents. They turned entire atmospheres into plasma, burning everything that lived. No survivors. No ruins, just dead rocks floating in space. Sarah had ordered Earth's fleets to protect the colonies. Brave men and women had flown their ships against the Zephyrian vessels, fighting with everything they had. But human weapons could barely scratch the bay. Alien hulls, while Zephyrian beams cut through human shields like they were made of paper. The worst part was how methodical the aliens were. They did not attack randomly. They started with the newest, weakest colonies and worked their way inward toward Earth's core systems. They were not conquering. They were exterminating, world by world, system by system. "Admiral," the communication officer called out, "we're getting reports from multiple scout ships. The Zephyrian fleet is massing near the Tau Ceti system." Sarah felt her blood turn cold. Tau Ceti had 7 human worlds. 34 billion people lived in that system. It was one of humanity's greatest success stories, a collection of planets transformed into gardens by human engineering and determination. "How many ships?" she asked. "Our scouts count over 200 vessels, Admiral, all of them larger than anything in our fleet." Sarah stared at the map. 200 ships. The entire human navy had fewer than 800 vessels, and most of those were scattered across dozens of systems, trying to protect the remaining colonies. She thought about the children on those Tau Ceti worlds. Children who played in parks that their grandparents had built. Children who had never known war or fear. who went to bed each night believing that the adults would keep them safe. "Send word to all fleet commanders," Sarah ordered. "Every available ship is to proceed to Tau Ceti immediately. We make our stand there." Her aide looked uncomfortable. "Admiral, even if we gather every ship we have, we'll still be outnumbered 3-1. And their technology—" "I know the odds," Sarah said firmly. "But those are our people, our children. We don't abandon them." Over the next week, human ships from across the galaxy converged on Tau Ceti. Admiral Sarah Chen took personal command of the defense fleet, flying her flagship directly to the system's edge. She watched as brave captains positioned their vessels between the Zephyrian fleet and the inhabited worlds. The battle lasted 18 hours. Human ships fought with desperate courage, using every trick and tactic they had learned in centuries of warfare. They rammed Zephyrian vessels when their weapons failed. They used their own ships as shields to protect others. They died fighting, every one of them. But courage was not enough. Technology was not enough. Desperation was not enough. Sarah's flagship was one of the last ships destroyed. As her vessel broke apart around her, she managed to send one final message to Earth. "Tell them we tried. Tell them we never stopped fighting." The evacuation ships that had been waiting behind the human fleet managed to rescue some people from the Tau Ceti worlds, maybe 1 million out of 34 billion, the lucky ones who had been near spaceports when the attack began. The rest died as their worlds burned. Back on Earth, the leaders of humanity gathered in emergency session. They had tried everything they could think of. Diplomacy had failed. Military resistance had failed. Even their best weapons could not stop the Zephyrian advance. Reports came in daily now. More worlds going silent. More billions of people dying. The aliens were getting closer to Earth's core systems, closer to the home world itself. In the deep archives beneath the United Nations building, an old scholar named Dr. Marcus Webb worked, through the night, searching through humanity's oldest records. He was looking for something, anything that might help. Ancient texts, forgotten technologies, legends that might hold a grain of truth. Most people would have called him crazy. But desperate times made people listen to ideas they would normally ignore. Dr. Webb had spent his life studying humanity's earliest civilizations. He had read texts in languages that had been dead for thousands of years. He had found strange stories, consistent stories about humanity's first days on Earth. Stories about allies that lived in the spaces between worlds. Allies that had helped humanity survive when the world was young and dangerous. Allies that might still be listening, if someone knew the right words to call them. As the Zephyrian fleet moved closer to Earth, Dr. Webb kept searching. Somewhere, in humanity's forgotten past, he believed, lay the key to survival. The question was whether he could find it before it was too late. Dr. Marcus Webb rubbed his tired eyes and looked at the ancient text on his computer screen. He had been working for 3 days straight, surviving on coffee and determination. Around him, the underground archives of the United Nations building felt like a tomb filled with humanity's forgotten memories. The Zephyrian fleet was now only 2 systems away from Earth. The Kepler 442 system, home to 3 human worlds and over 3 billion people, lay directly in their path. Earth's remaining military leaders were preparing for another hopeless battle. Webb had found something, though. Fragments of text scattered across dozens of ancient civilizations, Sumerian tablets, Egyptian hieroglyphs, Celtic stone carvings, Aboriginal Dreamtime stories. All of them mentioned the same thing in different words. The Shadow Walkers, the Void Touched, the Hungry Dark, the Friends in the Deep Places. Webb's hands shook as he translated another fragment from a Mayan codex. The text was clear. When the sky burns and the children cry, speak the old words. Call to those who remember the first bargain. They will come, but the price, the rest was damaged, unreadable. A first bargain. What had ancient humanity agreed to? And why had it been forgotten? His computer chimed with an incoming message. Webb opened it and felt his heart sink. The message was from the Kepler 442 system, sent 12 hours ago. By now, the light from those worlds would already be carrying news of their destruction. "This is emergency broadcast station Kepler 442A," the message began. "The alien fleet has entered our system. We have approximately 6 hours before they reach firing range of our worlds. All civilian ships are being loaded with evacuees, but there isn't enough time. There isn't enough room." Webb fast-forwarded through the technical reports and casualty estimates. At the end of the message, he found what he was looking for, a personal note from Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a colleague he had worked with years ago. "Marcus, if anyone can find an answer in the old books, it's you. We're not going to make it here. Too many people. Too few ships. My daughter keeps asking me why. The sky is getting brighter. I don't know what to tell her. Find something, Marcus. Find anything." The timestamp showed the message had been sent 11 hours and 57 minutes ago. Webb checked the latest reports from the Kepler system. No new transmissions for the past 6 hours. The worlds that had been home to 3 billion people were now silent. He slammed his fist on the desk, scattering papers. Elena's daughter would never ask another question. None of the children in that system would grow up to have children of their own. The Zephyrians had erased them all, just as they had erased 49 other human worlds. With trembling fingers, Webb opened his research files again. He had pieces of the puzzle, but not enough to see the whole picture. The ancient texts all agreed on certain points. Humanity had allies once, in the early days. These allies were not from Earth, not from normal space. They lived in the gaps between dimensions, feeding on conflict and chaos. The relationship had been symbiotic. The allies protected humanity from threats that normal weapons could not fight. In return, humanity provided them with something they needed. The texts called it the red gift, or the warm offering, or simply what flows: blood. The allies had fed on human blood, but not in the way monsters did in children's stories. They had fed on the life force itself, the energy that kept humans alive, a few people giving a little so that many could survive. But something had changed. The partnership had ended. Humanity had grown strong enough to fight its own battles, and the allies had withdrawn to their dark spaces. The knowledge of how to contact them had been deliberately hidden, buried in fragments across different cultures so that no one person could easily rediscover it. Webb's computer chimed again. This time, it was a priority message from Earth's Orbital Defense Command. The Zephyrian fleet had been detected entering the outer solar system. They would reach Mars in 72 hours. Earth would follow shortly after. Humanity's last military forces were gathering around Mars, preparing for a final battle. Admiral Chen was dead, but her replacement, Admiral Torres, was following the same strategy. Fight until the end. Make the aliens pay for every human life. It would not be enough. Webb had seen the battle reports from Tau Ceti and Kepler 442. Human bravery meant nothing against Zephyrian technology. The final battle would last hours at most. Then Earth itself would burn, unless Webb could find the complete summoning ritual. He worked through the night, cross-referencing fragments from different cultures. Slowly, a pattern emerged. The ritual required specific words in humanity's oldest languages. It required blood willingly given. It required the summoning to be performed at multiple locations across Earth simultaneously, at sites where the ancient stones still stood. Stonehenge in England, the stone circles of Scotland, the dolmens of Korea, the mysterious structures in Easter Island. Dozens of locations where ancient humans had built monuments that modern science still could not fully explain. By dawn, Webb had assembled what he believed was the complete ritual, but he was missing something crucial: the exact price the Allies would demand. Every text mentioned a cost, but none specified what it would be. He sent his findings to the Emergency Government Council that was now running Earth's defense. Within an hour, he received a response requesting his immediate presence at the emergency bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains. The underground facility buzzed with desperate activity. Military officers planned hopeless strategies while scientists worked on impossible weapons. In the center of it all, Acting President Maria Santos sat at a conference table surrounded by Earth's remaining leaders. "Dr. Webb," President Santos said as he entered the room, "please tell me you have found something useful." Webb placed his tablet on the table and activated the holographic display. Ancient symbols and translated text filled the air above them. "Believe humanity once had allies," he said. "Beings from outside normal space who helped us survive in our earliest days. The knowledge of how to contact them was deliberately hidden, but I think I have found enough pieces to make it work." General Harrison, Earth's top military commander, leaned forward. "What kind of allies? And where have they been while the Zephyrians have been burning our worlds?" "They exist in spaces between dimensions," Webb explained. "They only act when called, and only when the proper price is paid. As for what they can do," he showed them translated fragments describing battles against monsters that no human weapon could harm. "The text suggests they can fight things that normal physics cannot touch." "And the price?" President Santos asked quietly. Webb hesitated. "I'm not certain. The texts mention life force, blood, possibly years of human life. The ritual requires volunteers who understand they may not survive the summoning." The room fell silent. Outside the bunker, Webb knew, billions of people went about their daily lives, unaware that their leaders were debating whether to make a deal with beings from humanity's darkest myths. "How long do we have?" President Santos asked General Harrison. 48 hours until the Zephyrian fleet reaches Mars. Maybe 60 hours until they arrive at Earth. President Santos looked around the table at the faces of Earth's leaders. "We have tried everything else. Our weapons cannot stop them. Our diplomats cannot reach them. Our soldiers cannot defeat them." She turned to Webb. "How quickly can this ritual be prepared?" Webb felt the weight of humanity's survival settling on his shoulders. "If we start immediately, we can have teams at all the required locations within 36 hours. But, Madam President, I must stress that I don't fully understand what we would be calling. The entities described in these texts are ancient and alien. They may help us, but they are not human. They do not think like humans. Better to take our chances with them than to let the Zephyrians finish what they started," General Harrison said grimly. President Santos nodded slowly. "Dr. Webb, you have authorization to proceed. Gather your teams, prepare your ritual. If there is even a chance these allies can help us, we must try." As Webb left the bunker to begin preparations, he could not shake the feeling that humanity was about to trade one nightmare for another. But with the Zephyrian fleet approaching and billions of lives at stake, they had no choice but to speak the ancient words and hope that the beings who answered would remember their old friendship with humanity, even if the price turned out to be higher than anyone could imagine. Dr. Webb stood in the center of Stonehenge as the sun set over the ancient stones. Around him, a team of linguists and archaeologists prepared for something that had not been attempted for thousands of years. Similar teams were gathering at sacred sites across the globe, all connected by encrypted communication links. The Zephyrian fleet had destroyed the human defense force at Mars 6 hours ago. Admiral Torres and her brave crews had bought Earth precious time, but now nothing stood between the alien ships and humanity's homeworld. The enemy would arrive in 18 hours. Webb checked his tablet one more time, reviewing the ancient words he had pieced together from dozens of sources. The ritual was complex, requiring precise pronunciation in languages that had been dead for millennia. One mistake could ruin everything, or worse, summon something that humanity could not control. "Dr. Webb," came a voice through his earpiece. "This is Professor Kim at the Gochang site in Korea. My team is ready." "Dr. Foster here from Easter Island," another voice reported. "All preparations complete." One by one, the team leaders from around the world confirmed their readiness. 37 locations where ancient humans had built stone monuments. 37 places where the barrier between dimensions was thinnest. At each site, 3 volunteers waited with ceremonial knives. They had all read Webb's research. They understood that the ritual required life force, blood willingly given. They knew they might not survive the summoning, but they had also seen the images from the dead colonies, the burned worlds where children had died calling for help that never came. All teams, this is Dr. Webb, he spoke into his microphone. We begin in 60 seconds. Remember, the words must be spoken simultaneously across all sites. The timing is critical. Webb looked up at the massive stones of Stonehenge. Ancient humans had built this place long before they had developed writing or metal tools. They had moved stones weighing tons across miles of countryside, using nothing but rope and determination. What had driven them to such effort? What had they been trying to accomplish? Now Webb thought he knew. They had been building doorways, anchor points for entities that existed between dimensions. The stones were not just monuments. They were invitation letters carved in rock, waiting for someone to read them aloud. 30 seconds, Webb announced. Around the world, volunteers raised their ceremonial knives. The linguists prepared to speak words that felt strange on human tongues, syllables that seemed to twist reality just by being pronounced. Webb had found the most complete version of the summoning text in a hidden chamber beneath a temple in Cambodia. The ancient Khmer priests had carved it into black stone, along with warnings about the price of calling the Shadow Walkers. But the warnings were incomplete, damaged by time and weather. 10 seconds, Webb said. 5, 4, 3, 2, begin. The ancient words echoed across the world. In languages that predated civilization, human voices called out to beings that existed in the spaces between stars. The volunteers drew their knives across their palms, letting blood drop onto stones that had waited thousands of years for this moment. At Stonehenge, Webb felt the air grow cold despite the warm evening. The stones around him began to hum with a frequency that he felt in his bones rather than heard with his ears. Reality shimmered at the edges of his vision. "Something's happening here," Professor Kim reported from Korea, her voice tight with fear. "The stones are moving, not physically, but they're shifting somehow. I can see through them to somewhere else." Webb kept reading the ancient text, even as the world around him began to change. The spaces between the stones filled with darkness that was not simply the absence of light. It was darkness with substance, darkness that moved and watched and hungered. "Dr. Webb," came Professor Foster's panicked voice from Easter Island. "My volunteers are aging. They were young men an hour ago, but now they look like old men. Something is drawing the life out of them." Webb felt it too, a pulling sensation, as if something vast and invisible was drawing energy from his body. The volunteers at Stonehenge collapsed to their knees, their hair turning white, their faces gaining decades of age in seconds. But they kept bleeding onto the stones. They kept paying the price. The darkness between the stones began to move. Shapes that hurt to look at directly slid through gaps in space that should not exist. Webb caught glimpses of things that were not quite tentacles, not quite shadows, not quite alive in any way that human science could understand. The shadow beasts had awakened. "All teams, report status," Webb called out, though his voice sounded thin and weak. The summoning was draining him too, pulling years from his life with each word he spoke. "Australia site, successful contact. Volunteers are unconscious but alive. Mongolia site, the entities are here. They're beautiful and terrible. Scotland site, something went wrong. We lost contact with 2 volunteers." Webb kept reading even as his vision blurred. The ancient words were almost finished, but the final passage was the most important. It contained the binding, the agreement that would make the shadow beasts humanity's allies rather than its destroyers. But as Webb spoke the final lines, he realized something was wrong. The binding required a specific offering, something more than blood and life force. The text spoke of the memory of the first compact, but Webb had never found any record of what that original agreement had been. Without that knowledge, the summoning was incomplete. The shadow beasts were free to act as they chose. "Dr. Webb," came a new voice through his earpiece. This voice was not human. It spoke English, but the words seemed to come from everywhere at once, resonating through the stones and the air and Webb's own bones. "We remember you, children of Earth. We remember the taste of your blood and the warmth of your life. Why do you call to us after so many silent centuries?" Webb struggled to his feet, though his body felt decades older than it had an hour ago. Around him, the volunteers lay unconscious on the ground, their hair white, their faces lined with age. "Come, ancient enemy has returned," Webb said, not sure if he was speaking to the stones or to the darkness between them. "Not the same enemy our ancestors faced, but an enemy that wishes to destroy all humans. We ask for your help, as our people did long ago." The voice that was not a voice seemed to consider this. "The compact was broken when your kind grew strong. You chose to forget us, to hide the knowledge of our alliance. Why should we honor old agreements?" Webb felt desperation rising in his chest. The Zephyrian fleet would reach Earth in hours. If the Shadow Beasts refused to help, humanity would die. "Because we are still the children of those who bled for you," he said. "Because we remember that friendship, even if we forgot the words. Because you are hungry. And our enemies offer a feast beyond anything Earth could provide." There was silence for a long moment. Then Webb felt something that might have been laughter, though it sounded like wind through broken glass. "Yes," the voice said, "we are hungry. And these aliens who burn your worlds, they have life force far richer than what humans can offer. Ancient life, concentrated over millennia. We accept your offer, children of Earth. We will feed upon your enemies." "But the price," Webb said quickly. "What do you require from us?" "The same price as always," the voice replied. "A portion of your life force freely given. Your volunteers have already paid for this summoning, but if you want us to hunt across the stars, to devour an entire species, that will require more." Webb thought of the billions of people on Earth, the children who would die if the Zephyrian fleet reached the planet. How much more? 1 year of life from every human who draws breath when the hunt begins. Rich life, well-lived life, freely given. Not enough to kill, but enough to feed us through the long chase across the galaxy. The choice was stark. A year of life from every person on Earth in exchange for survival. Webb thought of all the things people could do in a year. Children taking their first steps, couples getting married, students graduating, artists creating masterpieces. But he also thought of the silence from the burned colonies. The children, who would never take another step, never ask another question, never grow up at all. "I accept," Webb said. "On behalf of humanity, I accept your terms." The darkness between the stones seemed to pulse with satisfaction. "Then we hunt. The aliens will learn why older species fear the spaces between worlds." As the shadow beasts began to fade back into their dimensional gaps, Webb collapsed to the ground beside the aged volunteers. Around the world, every human being suddenly felt a strange moment of weakness, as if they had run a long distance or stayed awake too long. They had traded a year of their lives for the chance to keep living. Webb only hoped it would be enough. Captain Lisa Morrison stood on the bridge of Earth's last defense station, watching the Zephyrian fleet approach through the darkness of space. 200 massive ships moved in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming like liquid metal in the starlight. In 6 hours, they would be close enough to begin the bombardment of Earth. Morrison had volunteered to stay behind when the civilian evacuation ships departed. Someone needed to document humanity's final hours, to record what happened when the aliens arrived. She did not expect to survive, but she wanted Earth's death to be witnessed. "Captain," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving strange reports from the outer solar system. Our deep space sensors are detecting anomalies." Morrison walked over to the sensor station. The display showed the expected Zephyrian fleet, but there were other contacts too. Dark spots that seemed to absorb sensor beams instead of reflecting them. Empty spaces where the stars had gone out. "What am I looking at?" Morrison asked. "I'm not sure, Captain. The sensors keep getting confused readings. It's like there are objects out there that exist and don't exist at the same time." On Earth below, Dr. Webb lay in a hospital bed, his body aged 20 years by the summoning ritual. The doctors said he would recover, but slowly. Around the world, the other volunteers were in similar condition. The price of calling the shadow beasts had been steep, but not fatal. President Santos visited Webb's bedside as reports came in from across the globe. Every human on Earth had felt the moment when a year of their life was taken. Most people thought it was stress or fear about the approaching alien fleet. Only a few understood what had really happened. "Did it work?" President Santos asked quietly. Webb turned his gray head toward her. His hair had been brown that morning, now it was white as snow. "They came," he said in a voice that sounded decades older. "Whether they will honor their agreement, we will know soon." In the depths of space, the shadow beasts moved between dimensions like sharks through dark water. They had not fed properly in thousands of years, sustaining themselves on the thin life force that humans provided through their ancient compact. But now they smelled something rich and potent ahead of them. The Zephyrian fleet carried the concentrated life essence of a species that had lived for millions of years. Each alien was a reservoir of experience and power that made human life force seem pale by comparison. The shadow beasts gathered in the spaces between reality, preparing to feast. Admiral Zethka commanded the Zephyrian fleet from his flagship. He was old even by his people's standards, having personally overseen the cleansing of 17 species over the past 10,000 years. Humans were just another young race that had grown too numerous and too bold. The plan was simple: destroy Earth's orbital defenses, then systematically burn the planet's surface until nothing lived. The humans had no weapons that could threaten Zephyrian ships. This would be less a battle than an execution. "Admiral," his sensor operator reported, "we are detecting unusual readings in the space ahead. There appear to be gravitational anomalies forming around our fleet." Admiral Zethka examined the sensor data with mild interest. Young species sometimes tried desperate tricks when facing extinction. Gas clouds, asteroid fields, primitive mines. None of it had ever made a difference. "Maintain course," he ordered. "Begin charging the planetary bombardment systems." That was when the stars began to go out. The darkness came from everywhere and nowhere. One moment the Zephyrian fleet was flying through normal space, surrounded by the familiar light of distant suns. The next moment patches of absolute blackness began appearing around them, growing larger and spreading like ink through water. "Admiral," the sensor operator's voice was tight with fear. "The dark zones are moving. They're surrounding our ships." "Admiral." Zethka had lived for 12,000 years. He had seen weapons that could crack planets and creatures that lived in the hearts of stars. But he had never seen anything like the shadows that now filled the space around his fleet. The darkness had substance without being solid. It moved with purpose without having a physical form, and it was hungry in a way that made Zethka's ancient instincts scream warnings. "Emergency maneuvers," he ordered. "All ships retreat to minimum safe distance. Activate quantum shields." But the shadows moved faster than the Zephyrian ships. They flowed around the alien vessels like living night, and the quantum shields that could stop planet-killing weapons passed through them as if they were not there. The shadow beasts had no physical forms that conventional weapons could target. They existed in the spaces between dimensions, able to reach into normal space only to feed. And the Zephyrian fleet had just become their dinner. Captain Morrison watched from Earth's defense station as impossible things happened in the darkness above. Her sensors showed the Zephyrian fleet, but they also showed areas where space itself seemed to be missing. The readings made no sense. "Captain," her communications officer said in a shaking voice, "we're receiving transmissions from the alien fleet. They're screaming." Morrison had expected to hear Zephyrian voices demanding Earth's surrender. Instead, her speakers filled with sounds of terror and confusion. The aliens were speaking in their own language, but fear needed no translation. On the main display, she watched as Zephyrian ships began to disappear, not destroyed in explosions of light and fire, simply gone, as if they had never existed. "What's happening up there?" Morrison whispered. She got her answer when one of the shadow beasts manifested briefly in normal space, just long enough to be seen. Morrison's cameras caught a glimpse of something that her mind struggled to process. It was massive, larger than the Zephyrian flagship, but it had no fixed shape. Sometimes it looked like a vast tentacle made of living darkness. Sometimes it resembled a mouthful of teeth that were also stars. Sometimes it was just emptiness with edges. The creature wrapped itself around a Zephyrian vessel and pulled. The ship did not break apart. It did not explode. It simply folded in on itself and vanished, consumed not just physically but dimensionally. Even the light that had reflected from its hull was devoured, leaving not even a memory of its existence. Admiral Zeth-Ka watched his fleet die around him. Ships that had conquered 1,000 worlds were being eaten by things that should not exist. His weapons could not target them. His shields could not stop them. His engines could not outrun them. "What are these creatures?" he demanded of his science officer. "Unknown, Admiral. They do not register on any of our sensors until the moment they attack. They appear to exist partially outside normal space-time." Another ship vanished, pulled into a fold in reality that closed like a mouth. The shadow beasts were methodical in their feeding, taking the vessels one by one, savoring each meal. "Send a message to the human homeworld," Zeth-Ka ordered desperately. "Offer terms. Offer anything. We withdraw from their space permanently. Admiral, the creatures are not responding to our transmissions. I do not believe they are under human control." Zeth-Ka realized the truth too late. The humans had not summoned weapons. They had summoned predators, ancient things that fed on life force and saw the Zephyrian fleet as a feast beyond their wildest dreams. His own ship shuddered as something vast and invisible wrapped around it. Through the hull, Zeth-Ka could hear a sound like wind through broken glass. The shadow beast was tasting his vessel, deciding whether it was ready to eat. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "I'm detecting massive energy drain from all ship systems. Something is feeding on our power cores." The lights began to dim throughout the ship. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was that Zeth-Ka could feel something feeding on him personally. His ancient life force, accumulated over 12 millennia, was being slowly drained away. He aged a century in minutes, his proud features withering as the shadow beast fed. Around him, his crew suffered the same fate. Thousands of years of Zephyrian civilization, all the knowledge and experience they had gathered, was being consumed by a hunger that came from spaces between stars. "Tell our people," Zeth-Ka whispered, with his dying breath. "Tell them not to come here. Tell them Earth is cursed. Tell them the humans have made a pact with things that should not exist." But there was no one left to carry his message. The Zephyrian fleet was gone, consumed utterly by the shadow beasts. 200 ships and millions of aliens, erased from existence as if they had never been. On Earth, Captain Morrison watched. The sensor displays returned to normal. The alien contacts had vanished. The dark zones were fading away. Space looked peaceful again, with only the familiar stars visible in the distance. "Captain," her communications officer said quietly, "I'm not detecting any alien ships. They're all gone." Morrison nodded slowly. Humanity had been saved, but she was not sure they should celebrate. The things that had destroyed the Zephyrian fleet were not human allies. They were predators that had been fed a magnificent meal, and predators, once fed, always looked for their next prey. 3 weeks after the Zephyrian fleet vanished, Dr. Webb sat in his wheelchair on the observation deck of Earth's orbital station. His body had recovered somewhat from the summoning ritual, but he would never be the same. None of the volunteers would. They had paid the first price for humanity's survival, and it showed in their white hair and lined faces. President Santos joined him at the window, looking out at the peaceful stars. Earth's cities were celebrating. The alien threat was over. Children played in parks again, and adults returned to their normal lives. Few people understood what had really happened in the darkness above their world. "The reports are troubling," President Santos said quietly. Webb nodded. He had been reading the same reports. In the 3 weeks since the Zephyrian fleet disappeared, human long-range sensors had detected strange events throughout the galaxy. Star systems going dark, communication signals from distant civilizations cutting off mid-transmission, entire sectors of space becoming quiet and empty. "They're not stopping," Webb said. "The shadow beasts, They've tasted what alien life force offers, and now they want more. Can we control them? Can we call them back? Webb shook his head slowly. The ancient compact only required them to protect humanity from the Zephyrians. They've fulfilled that obligation. Now they're free to act as they choose. Through the window they could see Earth below, blue and green and alive. 7 billion people went about their daily lives, unaware that their survival had doomed countless other species across the galaxy. "Sir," came a voice from behind them. A young communications officer approached with a tablet in her hands. "We're receiving reports from our deep space monitoring stations. Something's happening in the Vega system." Webb accepted the tablet and read the report. Vega was home to the Centauran Republic, a peaceful alien civilization that had never shown hostility toward humanity. They were artists and philosophers, known throughout the galaxy for their beautiful music and complex mathematical theories. The report was brief and horrifying. All communication from the Vega system had stopped 6 hours ago. The final transmission was a distress call in broken English. "Darkness between stars eating light, eating us. Tell humans sorry we never made peace properly. Tell them forgive us for being afraid of young species. Tell them we understand now why they called monsters." Then silence. "How many Centaurans lived in that system?" President Santos asked. "Approximately 2 billion, the communications officer replied. "All colonies, all space stations, all ships. Everything's gone quiet." Webb closed his eyes. 2 billion beings who had never harmed humanity, consumed by creatures that Earth had summoned. The shadow beasts had moved beyond their original purpose. They were no longer humanity's protectors. They were a plague spreading across the galaxy. "Dr. Webb," the officer continued, "there's more. We're detecting similar dark zones forming near other inhabited systems. The Rigel Collective, the Tau whale songs, the silicon communes of Arcturus. It looks like the creatures are targeting every major civilization within 50 light-years of Earth." President Santos gripped the railing of the observation deck. "We have to do something. We can't let them destroy everyone." "What can we do?" Webb asked bitterly. "We summoned them with words we barely understood, offering prices we didn't calculate. We have no way to control them or send them back. There has to be something in your research, some way to revoke the compact or end the summoning." Webb had been studying that question for weeks. He had gone through every fragment of ancient text, every reference to the shadow beasts. The answer was always the same. "The compact can only be broken by mutual agreement," he said. "Both sides have to consent to end it. But the shadow beasts are no longer bound by the original terms. They've grown beyond that. They've tasted power and life force beyond anything they knew before." "Then we negotiate," President Santos said firmly. "We find a way to talk to them and convince them to stop." Webb laughed, but there was no humor in it. Negotiate with beings that exist partially outside reality? Beings that see entire civilizations as food? They don't think like humans, Madam President. They don't have emotions or morality as we understand them. They're apex predators from spaces where our concepts of right and wrong have no meaning." But even as he spoke, Webb remembered something from his research. A fragment of text that had puzzled him, carved into stone in a temple in Tibet. The ancient words spoke of a final summoning, a last call that could close the doors between dimensions, permanently. The price, however, was absolute. "There is one possibility," Webb said slowly. "The ancient texts mention something called the Great Closure, a ritual that can seal the pathways between dimensions forever, cutting off all contact between our reality and theirs. What would that require?" Webb hesitated. The text had been clear on this point, written in symbols that left no room for misinterpretation. The life force of the summoner. Not just years, but everything. The person who performs the ritual dies completely. Their life energy used to power the dimensional seal. "You," President Santos said, "you're the one who summoned them. You would have to be the one to send them back." "Yes. And there's no guarantee it would work. The shadow beasts are much stronger now than they were when the original compact was made. They've fed on alien civilizations, absorbed power that might make them impossible to banish. President Santos stared out at the stars. Somewhere in that peaceful-looking darkness, ancient predators were consuming entire worlds. Species that had taken millions of years to evolve were being erased in hours. Dr. Webb, if you attempted this ritual, what are the chances of success? Webb considered the question honestly. Maybe 50%. The ritual would certainly kill me, but it might not be enough to close the dimensional pathways. The shadow beast might simply find other ways to reach our reality. And if we do nothing, then they continue feeding. Every civilization in the galaxy eventually becomes their prey, including humanity, eventually. The compact protects us for now, but if they consume all other life in the galaxy, they'll start looking at Earth with hungry eyes. They stood in silence for several minutes, watching Earth turn slowly below them. Webb thought about all the children down there, playing in sunlight, learning to read, dreaming about growing up to be doctors or teachers or explorers. They had no idea that their future might depend on an old scholar's willingness to die. I need to think about this, President Santos said finally. Consult with the other world leaders. See if our scientists can find any alternatives. Webb nodded, but he already knew what the answer would be. Humanity had faced extinction and chosen to make a deal with monsters. Now someone had to pay the final price to undo that deal. Madam President, he said quietly. While you're making your decision, I'll be preparing for the ritual, just in case. As President Santos left the observation deck, Webb remained by the window watching the stars. Somewhere out there, the shadow beasts continued their feast, moving from system to system like a plague of darkness. Every minute of delay meant more civilizations consumed, more children who would never grow up. Webb had spent his life studying humanity's past. Now he faced the possibility of ensuring humanity's future by erasing himself from it completely. He began to plan his own death, hoping it would mean something in the end. In the depths of space, the shadow beast felt a disturbance in the ancient pathways. The one who had summoned them was considering the final ritual. They had fed well on alien life force, but they remembered the taste of human energy. Sweet and warm and willing. They began to move toward Earth, not yet to attack, but to taste the air around humanity's homeworld, to see if their old compact makers were growing bold enough to challenge them. The hunt across the galaxy could wait. First, they wanted to visit old friends and remind them why ancient alliances should never be broken lightly. Earth's children had called monsters to save them from monsters. Soon they would learn which was which.